you guys are busy? Probably all of you guys. If you raise your hand, you're not busy? Okay. Well, there's this conference I went for. I work at this Chick-fil-A, and it was about like how to have proper standards with your like health and safety of your food. And it was funny because the guy was like, "Oh, because sometimes people will make excuses. We can't follow the protocol because it's busy." But if you know anything about Chick-fil-A, it's always busy. Very similar to our own lives. It's always very busy. And he said, if you can't follow it because you're busy, well, you're always busy, so you're never going to follow it. Now, in today, what I'm going to be speaking on is really the same thing. It's about how God is our refuge. If you knew, this place is called Refuge. But what is your refuge in your life? Now, I think something that really summed up what this meant to me, and when I heard this, it basically hit me right at the core. And it was from Martin Luther, and it was upon being asked one time by a friend what his plan were for the following day, he replied, quote, work from early until late. In fact, I have so much to do that I shall spend the first 3 hours in prayer, end quote. And it was interesting, because sometimes I'll give the excuse as Chick-fil-A as a leader, well, we can't follow the protocols because we're busy or whatever, but in reality, that's exactly why we do follow them. The same thing goes with our personal lives. Every single one of us. If we are so busy that we can't even get through the day, just like Martin Luther did, he knew he had to rely on God because he was that busy. Now, what's the question? What do you run to? Now, really a good test of what your actual refuge is isn't just what you think of. Maybe that would work or maybe that wouldn't. The point is, what do you run to? When things get stressful, when things get hard, when things don't go as they're supposed to go, when things come up, what do you run to? That truly is going to be your refuge. Now, that might be something, a coping mechanism. That might be a sin. That might be an addiction. The truth is that if you're running to that, you're not running to God. Now, I'm going to discuss how God is our refuge. So where do you seek comfort from? Is it from the world? Maybe you seek comfort from even rebelling against God by getting high or whatever, doing things that are wrong. Your friends, your popularity, your money, your job, your sports. It could be any of those things that you seek comfort from. But here's the problem with all of those. You probably already know this deep down inside, is that all of those things will leave you with zero fulfillment. Zero lasting fulfillment. You're just going to seek for the next one. I met this guy who won all these state championships for wrestling from Lovejoy. I met him one time, and he still wasn't fulfilled. He was still broken at the end of the day. Another trophy didn't get him anything better. So I really have 3 main points. The first one is, do not seek comfort from your situations. Why is that? Why would you not seek comfort from your situations? That's exactly what's all going around you. It's because those will all let you feel empty at the end of the day. They'll all leave you more broken at the end of the day. Now, John 16:33 also gives us a reason why we should not seek comforts from our situations. And it said, I have said these things to you, so that in me you may have peace. In the world you have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. See, hard times will come. Jesus didn't say it was going to be easy, but he actually said quite the opposite. He said that you will have adversity, you will have tribulations. So if it's going to be hard in our current situations, why would we want to seek comfort from them when we know that they're not going to be comforting? Now, hard times will come whether you're ready for them or not. It truly doesn't matter if you're ready for it or not. Now, this is one of my favorite passages in Isaiah 43, or chapter 43, verses 1 through 2. That's Isaiah 43, verses 1 through 2. But now thus says the Lord, He who created you, O Jacob, He who formed you, O Israel. Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned. See, I'll be real with you guys. A lot of the time, I want to walk around the troubles. I want to walk around the problems. I don't want to walk through them. I want to get the easy way out of it. I want to get a shortcut from it. But see, here's the thing. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the fire, it will not burn you, and you will not be consumed by it. See, it never says go around the fire, but it says quite the opposite. It never says it won't get hot. No. But when the fire comes, when the trials come, I will be with you. See, you shouldn't seek comfort from what you see God doing in your life or what might be happening. You should seek comfort from His promises and knowing that He will be with you, no matter what you see, no matter how hot it gets, and no matter how high the waters get. You trust in His promises. It might be hard to feel Him. It might be hard to see Him, but don't trust in your feelings. Trust in His promises. We aren't called to have faith in what we see or feel, but in his promises. That's the whole idea of faith. Now, this isn't a cop-out saying that we don't have to have proof for God, that we don't have to have a good reason for believing in him, but it is a reason why we must have faith in the trials. Hebrews 11:1 states, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." See, that's the whole point of faith. It's to have the faith in his promises, that he won't let you down, that he will be with you in the fire or the water. Now, I'll be real with you. I've said this before, but sometimes it gets hot. Sometimes it gets real hot, and sometimes you can't see him. But at the end of the day, I have to tell you again that he says he will be with you, and God is not a liar. He holds to his promises. Now, the second point is take refuge in his promises. See, we know he makes promises to us, but what's the point if we don't actually use it? Another example that actually Pastor Joel did last Sunday was talking about a car. Imagine if I give you a car. That's exciting, and you can keep it in your garage. But what happens if you never drive it? Did the car really do anything for you? Well, now I have to spend money on the registration or the insurance. It might actually be a burden to you if you never use it. The same point is here. If you never actually rely on God's promises, they can be true, and you rely on which they are true. But if you never actually use them, if you actually never rely on them, it does you the same thing as the car in the garage. Absolutely nothing. Now, an example of a situation not to take comfort in is Joseph. Now, this is Joseph in the Bible in Exodus. His brothers sold him into slavery. So why did he rely on God? Because he trusted his promises. Now, I've always thought about that. Why did he resist Potiphar? Or why did he have joy when he was in the prison? Now, if you look at it, he was a young man. How would he not have that lustful intention for the woman? But really, when I look at it, it was remember the dream. See, he had a dream. If you look at Genesis 37, chapters through 46, we see that he had a dream of how he would basically have all of his brothers, and even his mom and his dad, as the moon and the sun, would bow down to him, and that he would save them. Now, he believed in this promise that God made. He believed in this dream. So when the temptations come, when the trials came, when the heat came, when the water came, he wouldn't deviate off the road, but he would stand fast onto the road. No matter what he saw, no matter if he got thrown into jail for up to almost a decade, as most scholars believe, no matter anything like that, he would hold fast to what he knew was true, which was the promises that God gave to him. Now this has another spiritual war implication. For example, our fight versus the adversary. Revelation chapter 20, verse 10 states, "And the devil who had deceived them was thrown in the lake of fire and sulfur where the beast and the false prophet were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever." Now that can be comforting for us. Because maybe it's just me, but sometimes I feel like the devil's getting the best of me. Sometimes I feel like I'm losing the battle. But if I was the devil, if I was the adversary, this would be one of my least favorite verses in the Bible, because it's my downfall of what's going to happen. See, trust in his promises, not necessarily what you feel like or what you see, but trust in his promises. See, God is our refuge, but we also hear it in Psalms 46, verse 1. And it's actually on the back of the refuge t-shirt. We might have seen it, but it's God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. See, God isn't necessarily just our refuge from what's going to happen or the tribulations in this world, but on a whole different level, an eternity level, he's our refuge from God's own wrath. Because when we are in Jesus Christ, there's no condemnation for those who believe in Christ. See, it has a whole other implication to us. And that's Psalms 46:1. He's a present help. So my third point is, so why does he let us go through trials? Why does he let it get hot? Why does he let the waters get hot? See, sometimes God doesn't calm the storm, but calms his child. This was a quote from actually the Vincent Psalm. It's actually in their dining room. And it says, quote, "Sometimes God calms the storm, other times he lets the storm rage and calms his child." End quote. Now, if you look at Mark 4, there's a very interesting thing that takes place. Jesus commands his disciples, go across the sea. Go across it and go to the other side. Now, when Jesus commanded his disciples to do this in Mark 4, it started getting stormy. This great storm appeared. And the disciples were so confused. They were like, Jesus told us to do this, and we did exactly what he told us, and the storms came. So what does this mean? This means God doesn't necessarily spare his children from going through storms and letting them get refined because he actually cares about us. Now I'm a father. Now, sometimes he doesn't necessarily do exactly what I would want him to. Sometimes he gives me challenges that are harder than sometimes I think I can bear. But he knows that in the long run, it's going to make me stronger. So why does he let us go through trials? What's the point of this? Really, when we look at it, it's to grow. It's to have a steadfast on it. There's many different things, but one thing is Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. And it says, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." See, that was the same story of Joseph, the one that was sold into slavery. But God did this for good, just as he promised for Joseph, the dream that he had. Now, Joseph didn't know exactly how he was going to get there, or all the things that took place. God didn't tell him that. Maybe God isn't going to tell you everything about your future as well, if he hasn't done it in the past, in the Bible as well. Now, when we look at this, is that what man meant for evil, God meant for good. This is the ultimate restoration story. The ultimate switcheroo here is when we see it, what about when Jesus died on the cross? We call it Good Friday, but in reality it's more like Black Friday, the popular retail holiday. We call it Good Friday, but why is it good? Because his son died on the cross. The point that it's so good is that it gives us freedom. So why? So why do we go through trials? It's being dependent on God. That's the reason why. James 1, or chapter 1, verses 2 through 4 says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." Now this says to have joy in the trials. That's what it states. But it also talks about how the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. This hit me, and I actually wrote it on my desk on a sticky note when I heard this for the first time. And it was talking about, why do we have the joy in the darkest moments? Why do we have joy when we have trials? I'm not talking about self-inflicted trials here. Because if you're doing those, well then you can have joy in them, but at the same time, it is your own fault. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about trials that God throws our way. The point here is that I wrote down is the reason why we have joy in trials is because we know the steadfastness of our faith produces steadfastness. See, the main reason why I go through a trial and have joy in it is because I know that in the future when I go through another trial, I can look back. I know God's going to provide for me. Not because, just because His Word says it. His Word says it. But also, all of these times in the past, I've seen Him come through. I've seen too much to not believe in God. He showed me too much to not believe in His promises. That's why we have joy in the darkest times. Now, I wrote that on my desk, and I told some of you guys about this, but I prayed for humility a while back. And man, God definitely gave it to me. But that sticky note, I can still find. And it really set all of those times when I could have given up, all those times when I could have fallen back, I realized why I'm going to have joy. And that got me through. But why have joy? Because He's the testing of faith. Because all these trials produce faith, that when you go through the storm, you will be safe. Not because it's not stormy, not because it doesn't look bleak, but because His promises are true. It keeps us dependent on God. It humbles us to a certain degree, which is the next one. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 7 through 10. And it's really about humility. So to keep me from becoming conceited, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But He said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, that I am content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong." See, this is about humility. For example, if you could lift all of the things that you're going through on your own and on your own back, maybe it will work for a short while. Maybe. But it'll all come crumbling down. The truth is, if your salvation, if your hope isn't in the rock of Jesus Christ, you will ultimately fall. See, it teaches us how to be humble. God gives grace to the humble, but opposes the pride. When you think you have everything figured out, you're in the exact opposite place where God can grow you and can teach you. Because you don't have a teachable mind. You are the one that's doing everything. You're the one who's behind it, but in reality, you're not. Because it's going to all come crumbling down. Now, this teaches us to be humble. This is why we go through trials. Sometimes we need to be humble. Maybe I needed to be humble. Maybe you guys need to be humble as well. We all need to come to God as a humility from ourselves, and to bring ourselves lower and to bring Him up. Now, Matthew 6:16 says, "And when you fast, do not look gloomy like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces that their fasting may be seen by others. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward." What does this teach us? Humility. See, when you're doing a good thing, sometimes you can do good things, but it's only for the sake of the people around you. It's not for Christ. It's for your friends. It's for your family. It's for your church. It's not for Christ. Fasting isn't, it also talks about fasting. Fasting isn't just about giving something up to God, but it's about living dependent on God. It's going to be real hard to grow in any type of spiritual journey, especially when it comes to God, if your screen time is higher than your time in the Word. I want everybody, if you have a phone, to pull up your screen time, or maybe this is later, and just look at it and think about this. If your screen time is longer than you're spending with God, how do you expect to be transformed closer to God when you're spending more time with the world? Mathematically, it's not going to work. If you're spending 3 hours more, maybe more than that, and you're spending hopefully maybe 5 minutes with God, if you have a good prayer or a good Bible time with Him, what are you going to become in your life? It's that statistic that you are the medium of your 5 closest friends and the people that you spend the most time with. If you're spending most of your time not with God and spending a lot of your time on your phone and on things of the world, you're not going to become closer to God. So what are you going to do there? Well, you have to give something up. You have to give it up. This might be a self-inflicted trial where you go through the wilderness of not being able to be on your phone as much or being on these apps. The truth is that it's about being dependent on God. Now, I called out your phone, but it could honestly be anything for you. Anything that is something that is distracting you from God, that you're becoming dependent on. Anything that you're running to when you are stressed about anything, and you're running to that instead of your God, is ultimately your idol, because that's what you care about the most. See, we hear it in the Bible, is where your heart will be, your treasure will be also. Now, if our hearts is of the world, then that's where our treasure is going to be. Ultimately, that's what we're going to run to. Now, Luke 22, verse 42, talks about seeking His glory. And it says, saying, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done." This is something I've had to be convicted about. Sometimes I want things to go my way, and I want God to use me in the ways that I want Him to. But really, I need to seek His glory. See, Jesus, when He was about to get crucified, He was like, "If it is willing, can you have this cup removed from me? Pass it from me. But nevertheless, not my will, but yours." See, He humbled Himself to His Father, and He submitted it, His will, not His own wants, His desires, but He submitted it to ultimately God's will. Now, He was seeking His glory, not His own, not your own, not His own. Now, this is Galatians 1:10, and it says, "For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I was still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ." If ultimately you're seeking the will and the approval of man, how are you going to be able to seek the approval of God? Where's your heart? What are you trying to seek after? Are you trying to become more popular amongst your friends? Are you trying to become even a better looking Christian and you're trying to seek this own glory for yourself? Or are you seeking His glory and trying to serve Him? Daniel 6:10 talks about when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. See, this is the problem. If once a trial comes, if once a tribulation comes, and you aren't dependent on God already, you're going to have a real trouble going through that. There's a reason why Daniel had faith in the lions, and it wasn't just because he was built different than us. I mean, sure, he was. He had a lot more discipline than pretty much anybody here has. The point is that he was dependent on God. He wasn't going to go through little compromises. Whenever he was faced with even eating different foods, he said, no, I'll eat the vegetables and the water. See, he was disciplined himself. He was dependent on God. He didn't have things above that. So when the trials came, he knew which glory to seek. It was his. It was God's glory that he was going to seek. See, the reason why he went through that is because he prayed every single day, 3 times a day. So when he was going to be punished for praying 3 times a day, the reason why he had that faith was because he was praying 3 times a day. And that was ultimately the reason why he got punished. But he had the faith to get through it because he was dependent on God. How often are you spending with God? How often are you being renewed in his mind? If you're not being renewed very often, we all want to be the person that steps out in boldness. At least I do. I want to be that person. But if we're not living dependent on him, how do we ever expect to do that? If we're still chained by the things of what people think of us, how are we supposed to be bold and only care about what our Father in heaven is going to think about us? See, God was his refuge. That's what he ran to. When the document got signed, he ran to his refuge. He ran to God. See, God is your refuge, but it goes back to that part. He is your refuge. He has the ability to be your refuge. But are you going to run to him? Is he going to be your refuge? See, God can be your refuge, but do you want to make him your refuge? Are you running to him? Or are you putting other idols in front of us? So how do we react to trials? I believe there are 3 main things: joy, humility, and seek his glory. Be content with that. You're not always going to know everything. Joseph didn't know exactly how it was going to play out. He knew the end result and some of it, but he didn't have the whole map of how to get there. That's something that God showed him as he was going through it. But he still had the faith to get through it. If he isn't what's most important to you, how can he be your refuge? A refuge is what you run to. See, what I want to motivate you guys to is run to God. And ultimately, I don't have the ability to. I already know that. Only God can work through you. The same thing with Daniel. Do you want to seek his glory, or are you more interested in your own? The truth is it has to start with prayer. Are you preparing yourself? Are you legitimately preparing yourself every single day? If the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over again and expecting different results. See, you're insane to think that somehow you're going to be dependent on God when you do the exact same thing when you wake up, which is probably run to the world or wherever your refuge is. The truth is something's got to change. You've got to be renewed. It's not necessarily really difficult to explain, but it's very difficult to put into practice. So how are you going to do this? Well, we know you can't do it alone. That's not going to work. So how are you going to do this? You're going to do it in community. That's the first thing you have to do. And then the second thing is really the most important. You have to be dependent on God. It's got to be something that you let God into. So today we talk about 3 main points. Is really God is our refuge, and there's 3 that follow that. Is do not seek comfort from your situations, because they will all let you down. It doesn't matter what they are. The second is take refuge in his promises. And the third is, so why does he let us go through trials? Now at the end of the day, how we respond to trials is with joy, humility, seek his glory. But if we're not grounded and dependent on him, we're never going to be able to stand tall like Daniel did. Let's pray.